Hello everybody, you're listening to the Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. This is a weekly radio show where we chat about the local arts news. We have a different guest on each week. We head over to the Rhylight Zone for a short story and or some poetry. And we catch up with Twangling Jack Ford over in the Oak Shed for a weekly album review. As always, you can find us on Facebook. If you search for the Art Show on Wickham Sound, you should be able to find us. And we are repeated on Wickham Sound on Monday nights or on the Wickham Sound Listen Again, iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Please do leave us a short review on your podcast platform of choice. So this week we have a highlights show where we're going to catch up with some highlights of chats with our previous guests. But before we do that, we're going to head over to the Rhylight Zone, and this is the latest instalment of The Crumb by myself, Dane Cobain. It was these ghost stories that Harry had used to sell his sister on the idea of their late night ghost hunt. But now that it was the morning after the night before and they still hadn't seen anything, Caroline was starting to wish that she'd never agreed to the trip in the Crumb in the first place. Caroline looked around, but there was little for her to see. The investigation had taken place in the darkness, the only light coming from the handheld torches that the investigators had been provided with. There were a half dozen or so of them, plus an Irishman called Marlon, who worked for the tour company and had been leading them around the jail. That made 7 torches, plus the occasional reflections when the light played across the emergency exit signs. "Remember to keep your wits about you," Marlon said, as he led the party down yet another corridor. "You never know when the spirits might decide to make an appearance." "They'd better do it soon," Caroline murmured. "We've got an Uber booked for 2:15. They continued to pick their way through the near darkness, Caroline pulling the cord on her hoodie tight against the cold. They'd been told to wear warm clothes and sensible footwear, which Caroline had interpreted in her own special way to mean that it was more important to look good than to ward off the cold. The hoodie had been her only concession, and even then it was a thin one that clung to her figure, especially around her waist. She was wearing one of her favourite shirts beneath it, along with nude tights and a short black dress. She'd thought that her boots would be comfortable enough to explore the jail in, but she could already tell that she'd picked up a pair of blisters on her heels, and the cold had seeped through the leather until she couldn't feel her toes. She was normally the more practical of the two of them, but Harry was a guy, and that made his life a whole lot easier. He'd shown up to the investigation in blue jeans and a coat, and the sneakers he'd picked out looked like they were far less comfortable than they were. Caroline knew that because the two of them had the same shoe size, and she'd occasionally borrowed them, although never with her brother's knowledge or permission. She wondered whether she'd be able to convince him to swap his sneakers for her boots. Probably not, she thought. "If you look to your right," Marlon said, "you'll see a block of cells." "Another block of cells," Caroline murmured, but she'd misjudged just how quiet it was, and her voice echoed back at her from the stones. "Nobody forced you to come, you know." "I'm sorry," Caroline replied. Then she paused for a moment to think. "Wait a minute, what am I saying? I'm a paying customer and I paid for ghosts. So far, all we've seen is a bunch of empty cells." "I'm not in charge of them," Marlon said, holding a hand up defensively as though he was afraid that the two of them might come to blows. "It's not like I can dock their wages if they don't show up. But give it time, girl." "I'm 22 years old," Caroline said. "I'm not a girl." "Although your pronouns are she and her," Harry said, grinning at her in the darkness. "Come on, sis, lighten up." That was the latest instalment of The Crumb by myself, Dane Cobain, for this week's entry into the Rhylight Zone. You're listening to the Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound, and this is Georgia Michelle with Say Goodbye.
Hiding from my own mind, been so caught up in yours, longing for the feeling we had in the beginning. Face it, it's denial, maybe things aren't right. We're staying cause it's easy, stop trying to deceive me with roses and champagne to blind me from my headaches. Suppose it's time I made my case. Only bring me flowers if you want to, and not to fill the space. Only call me baby if you want to, not to make me feel like we're okay. Only kiss me in the morning if it's the first thing on your mind, cause these days it's not the first on mine. So I want to say goodbye. So I want to say goodbye. I want to say goodbye. so easy. Stop trying to deceive me with date nights and white wine to cloud me from thinking twice. So wake up and see the signs. Only bring me flowers if you want to, and not to fill the space. Only call me baby if you want to, not to make me feel like we're okay. Only kiss me in the morning if it's the first thing on your mind, 'cause these days it's not the first on mine. So I want to say goodbye.
That was Opening by Amrit Sond, and before that we had Say Goodbye by Georgia Michelle. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it's time for us to have some highlights now. So here's a highlight of our chat with the band Dog Ole.
Go on, Trotsky, tell them your method of songwriting. Go on.
Who? Me?
Yeah, you.
I wrote one song because I had an idea for a t-shirt design.
Nice.
I thought it needed a song in order to do the t-shirt, so I wrote the song just so I could do a t-shirt. But it was just one song. I haven't written any more songs about t-shirts yet.
So I've written a couple of songs, only two. I mean, Kel's really the most prolific songwriter between us. But the songs that I wrote, one of them was inspired about somebody getting cross about someone else's sandwich filling in a queue for a sandwich, and it just occurred to me that kind of was a good analogy for people getting a bit cross with people about their body choices and about people being gay or whatever. When it wasn't up to them, really, it's up to the person themselves. It's got nothing to do with anyone else. It's just, it's just choices. So yeah, that's how Subway came about. And the other one was kind of a cross between a song and a poem, which is Tribe, which is basically was inspired by being very drunk in my truck at Something Else Festival years ago, and listening to my friend Ree Crutchley singing around the fire. And I sent Kel a message saying, I want to write a song about this feeling, about how it's really nice and this lovely community that we know. And I want to write a song about it. And about 4 years later, it finally came into happen. Took a little while to birth that one. And that's called My Tribe. And that's basically what it's about. It's about the community of people that we know and that we hang out with in the summer. So, cool. Yeah. But Kel, like I say, Kel's the most prolific songwriter of all of us.
Yeah. I've written quite a lot of songs for my mate Dave and a couple for Dog Ole. Though, yeah, Trotsky's written the most for Dog Ole, and I like to say the song topics for Dog Ole are, the clowns, clowns, the apocalypse, and Dot Cotton.
It's the apocalypse as if it was a holiday destination.
Yeah. So, and then topics for my mate Dave's songs, I don't really know how I started writing them. It's just, it usually I'll find some sort of tagline, like sort of the main catchy bit, and then sort of write the song around it, I guess. So
cool.
Yeah.
Awesome,
man.
Yeah.
Most recently, the songs that have written for us have been about going up to London to party together. That's called Party Train. About people being a little bit awkward, a little bit social anxiety. About a grumpy old bloke on the bus as well.
Oh yeah, that was one. Yeah, you remember them better than me.
A few ones, yeah. Those are kind of the not recent. Chin Up's not particularly recent, but the other two.
That's one of our first.
Yeah. But yeah, the Party Train one, I think, is probably my favourite at the moment, actually. Yeah,
it's good fun.
Yeah.
Now, I think one of the reasons that Dog Ole came together was if you're a songwriter, you write a song, and sometimes that song doesn't fit the band you're in.
Yeah.
So Dog Ole is kind of like all the songs that didn't fit into other bands that we had, and so it's quite a mix.
Yeah.
That was a highlight of our chat with Dog Ole, and here we are in conversation with poet Chris Buckland.
Yep, and I want to chat to you about a little bit about that as well. So, obviously, you're very open with your struggles with substance abuse. Can you talk us a little bit about how you overcame that?
Yeah, I had to realise firstly that I had a problem. You know, it was my problem. It wasn't anybody else's. It wasn't the world's. It wasn't people around me. It was me that had the issue, and I had to own it. I had to say, I've got a problem and I need help. The struggle I found was getting the help that I needed, because going on Google and putting help for drug addiction just gets you a massive list of very, very expensive rehabs. I found a rehab in Leicestershire. Didn't get on very well there, dropped out, relapsed. That happened several times. Then last summer, like just over a year ago, I ended up in hospital with cellulitis in my left leg, and they were talking about amputating my leg. It was black from the knee down. And I thought, do you know what? I've got to do something. I have to change. I have to go to somewhere or someone and listen to what they're going to tell me to do. Because the rehabs I've been in before was like, please, can you help me? They're like, of course we will. This is what you need to do. No, well, I'm not doing that. I was arrogant. I was egotistical. And I had to change that mindset and say, right, whatever is suggested to me to do through the CA rooms, through the rehab, through anyone that had a long period of sobriety behind them, then I would give it a go. And I did. And it seems to be working well for me, coming up to 11 months clean and sober in a few days.
It's amazing. And you mentioned as well that, like, with your poems, you'll occasionally get people commenting on them who relate to your journey and perhaps, you know, are where you were a year ago, 18 months ago, and are looking for help themselves. What advice would you give to somebody who's in that position? Where would you suggest maybe is their first port of call to find that help?
So if somebody reaches out to me and sends me a message, I will ask them where their local town is, because people from all over the country reach out. I'll ask them what their local town is, and I'll find their local drug workers. You've got like Turning Point, Change, Grow, Live, and the Forward Trust are great at helping people out of prison. I was at one of their luncheons the other day. I'll send them that information, the phone numbers, and a link to the websites. I will then send them the AA, NA, or CA websites, whichever one works for them, or whichever one that I feel would be best for them. And I'll also look up their next local anonymous meeting and the time of it, and I'll send that information to them, and that's my bit done. It's then up to that person, if they really want to change, to pick the phone up and to go to a meeting, to actually put some action into it. Because as addicts, we tend to feel that, can't you just give me some tablets and make me better?
Yeah.
You know, that's the way of life. Let me take something that will make me better. No, you have to put action in. You have to make a choice and decide, right, I am going to get better today, not tomorrow, because tomorrow never comes. I have a poem about it somewhere. It's called The Promise. The addict's promise is, every night I go to sleep, I promise I won't use in the morning. And then every morning I get up and I relapse. Whereas if you promise to yourself in the morning, I won't use just for today, you generally get through. And that's how I've done it. You know, one day at a time, get up and go, right, I am not using today. I am going to do the best that I can and be the best that I can. And I've learned the tricks and tools how to stay doing that for for the rest of my life, through the CA meetings, NA meetings, and AA meetings that I go to.
Yeah. That was a highlight of our chat with poet Chris Buckland, and here we are in conversation with vegan activist Jessica Hay. How many was it? You you organised a meetup this weekend, didn't you? How many went to that?
I think there was 38 vegan runners who were registered. And then there was like a couple who weren't, like 3 or 4 who weren't registered. So 41 maybe in total, like vegans who were there running. And we all went for a big breakfast afterwards and took over the top floor of a cafe, and then we went for vegan ice cream afterwards. It was really, really nice.
Well, and as your runner, got to ask this question: where do you get your protein?
Where do I get my protein? Mostly beans and lentils, and random vegetables. I don't really do the whole tofu thing because trans girl. Mostly beans and lentils.
Very nice. Awesome. Okay. That's pretty much it. Just the next questions really. So it's 2 in 1. So what have you got planned next, and where can people follow you to stay up to date?
So I am tomorrow. I'm in Manchester to gate crash the Co-op AGM. Co-op are supposed to be a cooperative. They're supposed to listen to their members. Their members keep voting that they should drop Franken chickens, which are a cruel breed of chickens that grow in 35 days and then are killed. They live really short, like not very nice lives. So we're going to go say hello. And then at the weekend, I'm doing AV in London. So I'm doing an 8-hour cube in London. So a lot of activism next. And you can find me on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and I'm trying to get followers on TikTok at Just Doing Activism with 1 S, all one word.
That was a highlight of our chat with activist Jessica Hay, and here we are in conversations with local musician Dave Cannings.
And speaking of performances, so you've got a date coming up. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. This is my big recital. I haven't done a recital since before COVID. You know,
Hmm.
a lot of things have been going on in my life, so that I suppose organising concerts took a bit of a back seat while I was sorting life out. But
Yeah.
now I feel ready. So this is a concert with music that I'm passionate about. This is Renaissance music. Obviously, a lot of this music was originally written for lute, but it's
Hmm.
been transcribed over for guitar. And it's not just solo guitar. This time around, I've got a special guest coming along, Sasha Tompkins,
Hmm.
who is a wonderful soprano, and we're doing 6 John Dowland lute songs. John Dowland was like the preeminent lutenist and composer of Elizabethan England,
Hmm.
and we're doing 6 of his songs. And the rest of the program is sort of, it says Renaissance music from the Renaissance period or music inspired by the Renaissance. So I've taken
Yeah.
a bit of a cheeky curveball there and chosen some modern music that reflects, I suppose, the sentiments of that period, the Renaissance period, even though they were written in the 20th century.
Hmm.
So we'll see what people think of that. But one of them, of course, is called Temptation of the Renaissance, which is the title of the concert.
Yeah.
So it was a period that tempted people to think outside of the box and strive for new sounds and new ways of writing poetry or music, and even scientific thought. So it's and plus the fact that a good half of the program is music written by Englishmen.
Hmm.
And of course, I think you can't get a better interpretation than somebody playing a piece of music from their own country.
Yeah.
That was a highlight of our chat with Dave Cannings, and here we are in conversation with poet James Alvarez.
But in my own life, I also went through some bad times and learned lessons from that, which brought me to a better place.
Hmm. Well, and you mentioned, I think I can't remember where I read it, but you said some of the themes you write about in the collection. You've got love, writing, mental health, and grief. Can you expand a little bit upon those themes and talk about how they manifested both in your life and in your poetry?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So mental health, I don't have any diagnosable issues, but everyone struggles with mental health, right?
Hmm.
The brain's an organ. We all have that. We all struggle in that way. I've had my struggles, anxiety, and feeling not like I don't cope with things in the best way. Sometimes you've gotten better, obviously, over the years. Love poetry has always been a sort of a guilty pleasure of mine. So there's definitely elements of that. Not all about the same person necessarily, obviously being written over this expansive time. Not all about that. Grief, we've all experienced that. I've lost people. I'm sure a lot of other readers have lost people. So there's a little bit of that as well. A little bit of a sort of a soft grieving of oneself too, to some degree, in a metaphorical way.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I suppose they're all very universal emotions as well. So, I think that's the interesting thing about love poetry is that, I'm sure you could read your collection and you could see them all as being about the same person. You can see them all as being about different people. You can see them all about being about people in your own life, like people who you as the author have never met. But, if you've written it well enough, people will be able to take that away and apply it. And is that something you try and do with your poetry to make it
It
more
is,
universal?
I think. I think definitely, especially in this collection, I try to make things specific enough to where they draw from a real place, but also universal enough where someone just goes, well, this isn't me at all. He's describing a hyper-specific person that's no one I know. I want people to kind of feel in some way like they can step into my shoes a bit.
How do you find that balance?
I see a lot of practice, a lot of editing, really what it comes down to. A lot of times when I write my first draft of stuff, it is just kind of whatever's on my head right onto the page. Going back and tuning it afterwards, that's where that really comes in. I have a tendency, especially in younger days, to write things that are really either super vague. And so it's like, I don't even know what this guy's saying. you know, or hyper specific where it's like, you know what, maybe we change this name, maybe we remove this name, maybe we take out some of the details. It's a tricky balance because you want to leave enough imagery to show like, okay, we're describing a scenario, we're describing an emotion, we're describing a person, but not so much so that's universal. But really, I also just try to be honest.
Yeah.
You know, as much as possible. Obviously, dramatic effect and all of that.
Yeah.
You know, it's one of those things people who know me might be able to pick out like, oh yeah, no, I know who he's talking about here. You know, that's definitely this person. That's definitely true, but it's also, you know, it's just practice and editing.
Yeah.
That was a highlight of our chat with poet James Alvarez. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and this is Twangling Jack Ford with Music in a Pub with Friends.
Sometimes I want to sing about injustice and how we could make this world a better place. Sometimes I want to rage against the system and the hardships we all have to face. Sometimes I want to wash away the crime that no detergent could ever cleanse. Sometimes I just want to go into town and make music in a pub with some friends. Sometimes I want to question why progress must be fueled by greed. Bankers make us poor to earn more than they'll ever need. Sometimes I just want to take a break from this cycle that never ends. Sometimes I just want to go into town and make music in a pub with some friends. I boringly lecture on all of society's flaws. Sometimes it's overconsumption makes me get up on my high horse and blame the devotees of fashion, those dedicated followers of trends. But sometimes I just want to go into town and make music in a pub with some friends. I'm not someone who could talk to a crowd or even an average youth, but I think I can get my ideas across with the aid of a simple stew. And despite the constraints of meter and rhyme, I think I can still make sense. And I take my songs as I go into town to make music in a pub with some friends.
That was Music in a Pub with Friends by Twangling Jack Ford. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it's time for us to catch up with some more highlights now. So here's a highlight of our chat with Lifesigns.
And even just showing them what's out there, because again, I think part of that's maybe the problem is that people just don't know it exists in the first place, and if they did, they'd really, really enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, I came back on when we did the cruise last time. I actually cruised home. And I sat down, I mean, and this cruise is full of Americans who are all over sort of 50. And I sat next to a guy from Utah, and I said, "So what's your favorite music?" And he said, "Oh, Alex Harvey and Bebop Deluxe." And I'm thinking, how do I get to you? How do you know that they exist? And it's the same for the younger bands, because generally a lot of people, especially in the States, because it's so hard to get over there with the cost of the visas and everything else now, they don't think there is anything new. They the channel, the radio channel will be like a Bryan Adams channel, a Beatles channel, a Kiss channel, but nobody's really championing what's coming through. And there's some great music coming through. There really is amazing music coming through.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. And just there's two questions in one to end on. So it's what have you guys got planned next, and where can people follow you to stay up to date?
Oh, lovely. Yeah. Well, we're at lifesignsmusic.co.uk, and we're on Facebook. So obviously the two easiest places to find us. We are that old fashioned. There is an element on Instagram. But we're generally doing some shows. We've got 3 UK shows coming up in November after we've done this short American tour in October. Then I have to go and do the day job in Australia for a month in January, but then we gradually get back. Marillion have asked us to support them in Montreal, so we're going to be doing that. And then off the back of that, there'll be festivals and other shows during 2025. So I'm looking forward to that.
That was a highlight of our chat with Lifesigns, and here we are in conversation with poet Elisabeth Horan.
I wanted to ask on that subject, because you've worked with a few different publishers, and what have you kind of found some of the similarities and differences between them, and what's it like to work with a sort of a small indie publisher?
Yeah, it's a challenge. So, when you're starting out and you've got kind of these little baby manuscripts and you send them off, it's like sending out your heart, your newborn. And aside from getting rejection, you're going to get rejections. But then if all of a sudden you get an acceptance and you're just like, yay, yes. And you commit because you think this is the best thing that in the entire world, and it is. But the problem is, it doesn't always go the way you want. Sometimes the press was 2 women and they close and your book no longer exists. So that's happened to me several times. I'm kind of, past 2019 at a point where things are coming around full circle, and I'm finding out they don't always renew your publication. And they write you and you go, hey, do you want to buy back all the books of yours? Because I'm taking you off our publication list. No one's buying it. And you're like, I guess so. And that's a bummer because, I think I understand why small publishers have to do that. And it was in the contract. I read it, that they don't have to renew after a certain amount of time. Right. But you don't really think it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And so when it does, it's difficult because how do you resell your book as a second edition? I don't know. If you know anybody willing to do second editions, let me know, because I think a lot of authors going into this don't realize those things can happen. And it feels like a punch in the gut when it does. And then on the other hand, I've worked with some that, you sign a contract where they kind of have like the life stranglehold on your book and you cannot get it back. And I don't know which is worse.
Yeah.
I tried. I mean, I run Animal Heart Press. I'm called the founding editor now, but I started it in 2017 and we're still going. And the whole point was to be like kinder to authors, because the publisher does hold a lot of power, even if it's a small press. Like, it's still, you hand over your baby and they take it and you have to trust them, and you can get screwed. Absolutely. And so our whole, like, we don't end anybody's contract unless they write us and say, hey, I want to take my book back. Sure, you can have it back. It's way more author friendly and very, very sparse contract in terms of it's your work, all we want to do is lift you up and support you. What we've tried to do. But so that was the model. Animal Heart Press, check us out.
That was a highlight of our chat with poet Elisabeth Horan, and here we are in conversation with Rob Terry, the drummer from Symbulus.
I wanted to ask you, you've recently got into handpans, right? Like, what can you what can you tell us about them as an instrument, and how did you start playing those?
Well, I found a sort of machine made, very cheap. I think professional handpan players would probably be absolutely disgusted at what I've done. but to me, it sounds great. And so, because hand pans are just ludicrously expensive. So I've always loved the idea of it, because it's that crossover between drums, and it's almost you cross between a steel drum and a piano, and it's a nice sort of crossover. So it's quite intuitive to play, because it's got the scale that's already sort of made into it. And then I guess as long as you've got rhythm and you've kind of placed in the right sort of order when it comes to the scale that it's in, you can make it sound quite good quite easily. So certainly a good instrument. I mean, my kids have enjoyed playing on it, and you know, they make nice sounds out of it intuitively, which is nice. So yeah, I'm enjoying. We've talked about even adding it to some Symbolist tracks. So yeah,
watch this space.
Yeah.
That was a highlight of our chat with Rob Terry, and here we are in conversation with David and Alice Baker.
So Alice, you mentioned the buggy that you got. I mean, so obviously I want to chat to you about running. I guess, can we start with talking about maybe about vegan runners, and asking how long have you been a member of Vegan Runners, and why did you join?
So we both went vegan on the same day. And we both joined Vegan Runners on that day. And we really wanted to join Vegan Runners. I'd seen quite a few at Park Run. Our local Park Run is Southampton, which is the second biggest park run in the UK.
Right.
So you'll always see a vegan runner up there. And I really loved the kit. Just thought they looked really cool. So we did agree that we would join on that day, which was the 15th of May, 2018. So over 6 years ago now. And our little group, Hampshire Vegan Runners, which also incorporate Wiltshire and Dorset, are just the best group of people. We have a WhatsApp chat that you have to mute because it just pings all day long. It's absolutely brilliant. We love our friends in Hampshire Vegan Runners so much. They're so supportive, and we're always meeting up and having lots of fun with them.
Awesome. And Alice, you were on what was it, ITV the other day for that amazing sounding marathon that you ran. Can you tell us about that?
That was crazy. That was the UK's first ever underground marathon, 91 laps of a Portsmouth underground bunker. I'd kept it a little quiet because I wasn't very fit for it, but I'd also done a couple of other events by them, Sussex Trail events that do crazy marathons. And I'd run around the Bovington Tank Museum. That was 47 laps. I've done that 2 years in a row at night time. And this one, the tunnels. I mean, it was dark, it was wet, it was damp, it was slippery. I fell over. It went on and on and on, but got it done. And in a very select few people that have achieved an underground marathon in the UK. So proud, but still sore.
Yeah, I can imagine. Awesome.
That was a highlight of our chat with David and Alice Baker. You're listening to the Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and this is Straight 8 with New Orleans.
Come on, everybody, take a trip with me, yeah. Down to Mississippi, down to New Orleans. Honeysuckle growing from the honeysuckle vine now. Good love just oozing there all the time. Every southern band is a Mississippi queen. Down to Mississippi, down to New Orleans. Yeah. a trip with me, yeah. Down the Mississippi, down to New Orleans. Honeysuckle brewing from the honeysuckle vine now. Woo! 'Cause love just oozing there all the time. Every southern man there's a Mississippi queen. Down the Mississippi, down to New Orleans. Come on. Come on. Come on.
That was Desert Ruins by Superlord, and before that we had New Orleans by Straight 8. You're listening to the Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it's time for us to head over to the Ilkshed now to catch up with Twangling Jack Ford for this week's album review.
The Well-Tempered Synthesizer. An album recorded by Wendy Carlos under the name of Walter Carlos. I bought this album from the music shop in Aylesbury. It is hard to find anything by Carlos, and none of it is available on streaming services. So I think this pristine original copy was a bargain, costing only £6. Walter Carlos famously transitioned and is now known as Wendy Carlos. This album is the follow-up to Switched on Bach and covers more Baroque composers. It is subtitled More Virtuoso Electronic Performances of Bach, Monteverdi, Scarlatti and Handel. The title refers to the collection of Bach's well-tempered clavier pieces. Up until the time of J.S. Bach, keyboards were tuned perfectly, which meant they could only be played in related keys. During Bach's lifetime, the octave was changed so that some intervals are slightly out of tune, but it became possible to play in any key. Carlos uses a Moog synthesizer, an instrument developed by Robert Moog in the 1960s. Released in 1968, Switched on Bach was a sensation at the time. Promoted as a classical album, it sold like a rock album. It was just Bach pieces played on a Moog synthesizer, but it was one of the first commercial uses of the Moog. Keith Emerson of ELP would make the Moog well known, though George Harrison had also been an early adopter, most famously on the Beatles' Abbey Road album. I heard snatches of Switched on Bach probably in the early 70s, but it did seem a bit of a novelty, a bit like Son of My Father by Chicory Tip or Popcorn by Hot Butter. I do, however, remember being impressed by Carlos's version of the part of Beethoven's Ninth that got a lot of radio play when it appeared on the soundtrack to Clockwork Orange. It had a sinister mechanical quality, and the clip from the film is one of the few Carlos pieces easily found on YouTube. Synthesizers now sound like the thing they are synthesizing, especially since the sounds became based on samples. Back when this record was made, its attraction was the sound of the synthesizer itself. The big old Moog with all its modules and patch wires created a sound all of its own. A sound that has never been particularly hard to listen to. It has never sounded harsh like its digital successors. The notes are rounded and the basses have a definite thump. The Moog does plucked strings and flutes quite well. Carlos does not make a big thing of that distinctive Moog resonance sound, using it only to add a bit of sparkle to some of the sounds, rather than as a gimmick like the awful Moog part Emerson ruined Lake's Lucky Man with. The sounds can be so varied in texture that many sounds can be layered, with each sounding distinctive. The original Moog synthesizer has now become a classical instrument, like the theremin and Ond Martino. Wendy Carlos also did the music to Disney's Tron, and is widely recognised as a pioneer of electronic music. The Well-Tempered Synthesizer, Wendy Carlos under the name Walter Carlos.
Big thank you to Twangling Jack Ford for this week's album review. Thank you to everyone whose interview highlights we shared. Thank you to you for listening. As always, you can find us on Facebook. If you search for The Art Show on Wickham Sound, you should be able to find us. And we are repeated on Wickham Sound on Monday nights. We're on the Wickham Sound Listen Again, iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Please do leave us a short review on your podcast platform of choice. You can also find us on Facebook. If you search for The Art Show on Wickham Sound, you should be able to find us. And you can email me here at the studio on dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. That's dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. So I'm going to leave you with one last tune, and this is Hogar's Wolf with Aoife. I'll catch you next week.
Gently and Ever is the wind, driving never changing skies through the night. Whoa, she gently screams, reclining in cloudless climes, sister of schedule. She plays all my desires and reaches deep into me. The moon shining in the darkest skies, mother to children of the Holy Land, priestess, warrior of the Sacred Heart, mistress to Cobain's lies,